The thing that people want to see the most is that you've been through the trenches. I really do think that. Because you and I can listen to a lot of inspirational people and can be driving to work, listen to a podcast, and you just subconsciously are saying, yeah, easy for you to say. Easy for you to say. That was handed to you and whatnot. And then you hear the backstory and you realize, actually, I've never been through that. Like, I've never slept on the floor of a gym, or I've never slept in my car by choice or by no choice, if that makes sense. This is where these people come from, and they pull themselves out of that. And then you think, okay, that's a pretty admirable how they've gone from A to B.
Are you curious about how to spend your life doing what you were born to do? The things that truly light you up and come naturally to you? Well, you're listening to the right podcast. I'm Joseph Bobadilla, and I'm a creative business owner running a content creation agency. On the From the Inside Out podcast, we'll meet and interview high performers from all walks of life. If they've got a great story of how they've built something or are simply thriving, doing what comes from the God-given dreams, talents, and gifts that are inside of them, that's who we're going to talk to. So together, let's find out what it takes and the rewards of building your life from the inside out.
We were on a podcast together. You were one of my first guests about 4 years ago now, right?
4 years ago, so December of 2019 was when I was last on this pod. And the biggest difference is obviously how much you and I have had to mature in that time.
Yes.
Think about what's happened since then.
Yep.
I
removed the line in my hair, so I just, grew it out normally.
Yeah. No, I like the slick back. I've been trying to slick back myself. I don't think I'm getting it too right.
I feel like we're starting this podcast with a shout out to Theo from Karina Barbers.
Theo from Karina.
Shalom.
Yeah, Big Lom. Hasn't touched my hair in a couple of years since I've shaved it, but I'm sure if he did touch it, it'd do wonders. But the looking back on that pod just in the last 24 hours has been very interesting, just to consider, how differently as business owners you've had to adapt and the opportunities that have come up since then, but also just the awareness around anything can happen, right? Yeah. We're at, I guess, kind of at the age where it's not like we're in our 50s or anything and we've lived 20 years of a corporate life or anything along those lines. Like we're kind of at the genesis of our own individual careers, and then bang, like you are forced to completely re-innovate and look at the world so differently. And that's, like that. I think that podcast was, December of 2019. So it's like,
I remember we titled it I think it was the search for significance or something.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure ChatGPT is going to help me title this one. But that was a deep conversation, and I feel like we're going to have a slightly deep one today. But thank you for coming this afternoon,
Pleasure.
Blake. And for those who are listening to this podcast and don't know who you are, everybody, this is my mate, Blake Randall, who is a good friend, but also the owner and founder of Inner Power Coaching. And so today, he is the second guest on the currently titled From the Inside Out podcast, where I'm having some conversations with people who I feel are really doing something with their lives, especially in business, but not necessarily just that, where it's coming from a place where they're actually truly passionate and truly purposeful with what it is that they're doing. And I feel like Blake is one of those people. So welcome.
Thank you, mate.
All good.
It's a good intro.
Before we get into a bit of who you are, I'm going to throw this question at you that the last guest on the podcast wanted to ask you without even knowing who you were, which was, if you had one final conversation with anyone, alive or dead, before you died, who would it be and why?
Well, if I said my dog, I don't think my wife would be happy. And if I didn't say my wife, I don't think she would be happy as well. So I can't really win-win. So putting those two aside, a big inspiration for me has always been Kobe Bryant, because of his just absolute dedication to the one thing for such a long period of time. And so he really inspired me across multiple areas of my life, whether it be in sport or whether it be in career. It still influences me to this day, just based, and he passed away on my birthday. So
no way.
Yeah. So I woke up I woke up on my birthday, and yeah, first thing I did was check Facebook, and then bang, get the news, and it was like, wow, tough. And so I just asked him about his just absolute pursuit of greatness and how he stayed so consistent and what sort of things he did daily and how he spoke to himself. That's probably the biggest thing, because when you're talking to, like when we're talking about millions, like his influence in China was ridiculous. That's billions of people that he had influence over, like how he carried that sort of weight. And, you know, even in our company now, I'm just, these are the questions I ask myself, like in terms of how, like, there's a lot of people that I know and there's a lot of people that I have, whether big I or little I, right, influence over. So yeah, those are the type of things I talk to about.
Wow, that's a good person.
But I'd be dead, so it'd be all for.
After that.
After that, yeah.
But maybe you'd record it as a podcast.
Yes.
You can pass it on.
Yeah, that's
and it would
true.
live
That's
past
true.
that. But
Yeah.
no, that Mamba mentality and all that, I feel like, yeah, that makes sense. It feels like that's something that you're in pursuit of, at least from what I see on the outset. And maybe one day, just like we all throw stuff in the bin and say Kobe, maybe we'll say Blake to something along those lines.
Doesn't have the same ring. It's like
Blake.
It's like one syllable to two syllables. You
just
could say
Blake.
Randall.
Oh, yeah. Randall.
Yeah.
Just
I like
Randalled that.
it. Yeah.
But
I didn't know
thank
my
you.
last name would be a verb, but I like it.
Just Randall it. But just for the people who, again, don't know who you are, maybe could you give me a very quick, brief introduction as to what it is you're doing? Obviously, you're wearing a shirt that says big letters IPC on a kettlebell. Maybe tell me, what's that about?
Yeah, so IPC started when my wife and I got married back in 2018. And it was actually really difficult to come up with a name that we really felt that resonated with us both. We were both sole traders before that, kind of doing our own thing. And of course, it was on our honeymoon that I was working pretty much every night. Sarah still doesn't let that one down. And so we finally came up with it just kind of sat with us well, the fact that we had to do a lot internally ourselves to get to the point of really being able to step up in terms of, I guess, being a sole trader, working for yourself, all the things that came with having to work long hours, rejection. So all of that just kind of, and then obviously from a physical standpoint, we both enjoyed training, and what that did for us, and a byproduct of what that did for us was it kind of gave us this inner power. And so, yeah, we started the company in 2018, and since then, obviously, a lot's happened. We're now in 5 locations across Southeast Brisbane. We've got a team of 12, including admin and people like that as well. So, yeah, it's not come without battle scars, of course. I think, a lot of us can look at other people and what they've achieved in such a short space of time, and we live in an era that people go to 0 to 7 figures in 6 hours. But I look back on a journey of 5 years, and I'm super grateful for everything that's happened since then.
So I feel like it's been a phenomenal journey, even from the time that I've known you, watching how that's developed. So I've known you since 2019 when I moved to Brisbane.
That's right.
And I was always fascinated. In fact, you're probably one of the people that most influenced me, especially in the very beginning, when you were talking about business and coaching. And in fact, you were the person that taught me first about business coaching, because I was wondering, why did you invest so much in coaching back in the day? But obviously you've got that mentality to continue learning and getting better. But going all the way back, so if we bring yourself back to the early days, well, whatever early days is to you, but young Blake, what were some of the things that young Blake wanted to do with his life?
It always is interesting when you think about what is a away from and towards motivator. And I think my entire upbringing was a lot more of going away from something that I didn't want before I could figure out what it was I was going towards. And probably that away from was similar to what we spoke about on the previous podcast, was not having what was feeling insignificant. It wasn't to feel significance, but it was trying to run away from feeling insignificance. And so what I wanted at that time was to be seen, but not to be heard, if that makes sense. I definitely wanted people to feel like that. Put it this way, I was not a kid that was very well respected when I was younger. I found it very difficult to properly communicate in a way that, there were people that you know that light up a room, and I was not one of them, if that makes sense. And I think when you have the ability to light up a room, you get respect out of that. And I found that I definitely didn't have that natural attribute. And so, it was a lot of thinking about not how I could get that, but how I could not be someone who didn't light up the room, if that makes sense. So short answer, there's no clear thing. I was a very frustrated, confused kid.
How did fitness come into the picture?
Fitness came into the picture because it was my only outlet for actually expressing how I felt, which was there was definitely an element of anger. There was an element of jealousy, about popular kids out there, about kids who are more athletic than I was. There's all those kind of traits that you need to properly fuel into something, right? And thankfully for me, I fueled it into something that did have a net positive. It wasn't drugs, it wasn't alcohol, it wasn't smoking or anything along those lines. It was something that, when my parents got me a very dingy dumbbell set for my Christmas, for Christmas one year, I probably just stayed in my room for, school holidays of 2010, something along those lines, and just lifted, as much as those dumbbells could allow me to. I think that then allowed me to know that there was something on the other side that could make you feel better about yourself. Still, it wasn't, the intention was never to get absolutely huge or anything along those lines. It was really just about feeling better about oneself. And I think that gave me a perfect outlet.
Did you also have any other involvement with sports or anything along those lines as well?
Yeah, I was playing basketball, and the intention was to take that to heights of college. I think that was a little bit later on, I guess, after I started really lifting weights, because the whole purpose of lifting weights as another side of it was to be able to get better at basketball. I was always the tallest kid. And then when everyone else started to grow faster than I didn't have any leverage anymore. So I needed to somehow get better.
I don't know what that's like, by the way.
Yeah, needed to somehow get better, and that's where being able to lift helped. Improve my speed and improve my lactic thresholds to not get fatigued as quickly. It's a double-edged sword of that. And once again, though, basketball was something that I've done since I was maybe 5 years old, was when I first picked up a ball. So it was always with me, but I only started to take it seriously after I started to see, I can actually see progress in this.
Right.
I felt like I was always kind of the same in terms of ability until I started being able to lift. And then when you start to see progress in a particular sphere of life, that becomes very addictive. And so that's what I was trying to seek in other areas as well.
Because even now I know that I've been to basketball games with you, and I know that you coach, and I know your mind loves the game. So when you were growing up, clearly there was a moment where that whole basketball and fitness started to weave together. So how did it end up in you choosing, by the looks of it, choosing to just pursue the personal training path instead of basketball?
Yeah, that's a really good story. I mean, I think when I first started playing at a higher level, I knew for a fact that I could potentially do something with this, and there were opportunities to do that overseas. But the concept I always think about the most when it comes to any sort of sport is you can work absolute hours upon hours upon hours, and all of it can be taken within a second. From an ACL, from an ankle, from a shoulder. And to me, when you're trying to find a long-term path for something that you can really dedicate yourself to, I just found like that was an incident. I had knee injuries, I had ankle injuries. I was at a basketball academy where, you know, it was trying to get you ready for college, but I was just so fatigued for so often. I just thought there is such dedication to this. And whether or not I just did not have the actual capacity from a physical standpoint where other people, you know, just had it easier. And when I say have it easy, it doesn't mean like from a natural perspective, but from a mindset perspective, they were like all in. I don't care if I get injured, I'll get back up, I'll keep going. I think my back was against the wall enough that I couldn't do that. So I started coaching my first basketball team when I was 15 years old. It was the under 14s, so they were only a couple of years younger than I was, which is funny to think about. But they, you know, when I can see someone be influenced by something I say, that really lit me up, because it was an experience that I had already had, and I was able to talk into their life to make sure they had a better experience around what I've already done. And so that same kind of framework led me to think, all right, how can I make this into a career?
I feel like what you're saying then, you said 15 and you were coaching those who were just a couple years younger than you. And from that point till even now, the journey doesn't really feel that long. You clearly had some level of self-awareness, even in your teens.
Yeah, between the years of as I was describing earlier, being a combination, a cocktail of jealousy, confused, angry, I guess as many hormonal teenagers can be, right? But being able to translate that into something that is going to be a net positive was something I was grateful to figure out. And that's where within a short space of time of anywhere between 6 to 9 months, I started to adapt to that. And
I feel like the vast majority of teenagers are probably not necessarily thinking about how their life can become a net positive. And I'm sure you didn't have that language, maybe you did back then. But what was it about that season that perhaps brought this out of you now? Like a lot of, you know, teenagers are probably not seriously thinking about what the next 10 years are going to look like. But it sounds to me that you had some idea of what you were going to do.
Yeah, it's some idea. I had no idea how it would work itself out.
How did it work itself out?
Well, when I became a coach and graduated my certs in fitness, pretty much you just begin. You begin at, I began at the gym that I did my mentorship at, and they just offered me a role there. And so straight away your back's up against the wall, right? You have no contacts, you have no leads, you have no reputation, you have no credibility whatsoever. You are an ant in a big swamp-infested, ego-centric industry. On the negative side, on the positive side, it's a beautiful, beautiful industry, but every industry has its negatives. And so, yeah, it was definitely the first 2 years is tough going, because you're trying to figure everything out by yourself. And I think now it's a lot easier for a lot of people to find mentors. But back then, like 8 years ago, there was not too many people in the coaching space.
So before we get into that, so you went from the coaching of basketball and obviously the pursuit of that to choosing to become a personal training coach. What was the mindset or the decisions that happened around that?
I just don't think I was really wired to do much else, because because I saw the benefit of having a coach myself so much. I had an online basketball coach who led me to personal development, who led me to learn how to program, how to eat, how to do all these different things. And so I saw such a difference in my life from his, doesn't even know who I am, but this guy from afar was able to influence me to do something which changed definitely the trajectory of where I was headed. And so I thought, all right, if this guy who I paid $99 to a week or something like that was able to change my life that was probably headed down the wrong path in such an influential way, then if I could just do that on a smaller scale, right, even if I could do that to, at the same similar influence of like 20% of that to someone else, then that would be worth it. And so, yeah, that's basically how I made that decision to go all in as a one-to-one coach, because of just the benefit I saw in myself and the difference I saw as well. But there were more days than not where you just question, is it really worth it? And I think that's and that's what every coach or every business owner has to go through when it comes to really identifying their path is, is this the time where you quit, or is this a time where it's just the season you have to get through?
Can you remember the first time you faced that?
There are many times that it's micro. I think even today I still face that.
Speaking my language.
I still even think today I still face that, a lot less, but there are times without a day where you think it's easy for them, it would be easier if I did this, or if I did that, if I got a corporate role, whatever it is. And the reality is it wouldn't be. I train people who are in these roles, and it's not easy. It's back up against the wall, just the exact same as what you and I do, right? I think it's an illusion that we tell ourselves that someone else out there has it easier than what we do. And the reality is they don't. They probably have it harder. Like, unless they are an absolute trust fund baby, which are very few far in between, like very few of them who are actually in the space of influence, because why do they need to be? And what influence do they have if they've not been through any adversity? So yeah, I don't think it goes away. I really don't. But at the same token, you get to the point of it's hard to consider doing anything else because you've put so much time, effort, and energy into investing into your own skills and knowledge to think, all right, well, this is clearly working in a good way.
Can you remember a time or a point where you felt that, yeah, this is the point of no return in that sense? Like, you're just going to keep going now, I can't quit now? Yeah,
daily. No, I'm serious. There is no one given time. There have been moments where I'm at the computer at 9 p.m. and I know that every other husband is already at home having had dinner with their wife and stuff. And you have those thought processes, right? And you think, I should just be doing that. But I've got to get this client diagnostics done for my coach for tomorrow to make sure he can coach them, or I've got to do this marketing funnel, or else that doesn't get done. It's never going to get done. And, we got to do this and that for the next season or the next quarter. So the main thing I always think about the most is what influence do I want to have when I look into myself in the next 10 years? So if I'm at my 35-year-old self, or my 45-year-old self, or my 55-year-old self, looking back, right, there are nights that you remember which were really hard because you're there, no one else is there, you're alone, and it's very quiet, and you're stuck with your own thoughts of, is this worth it? But then when you have moments and events where people come together and they're able to meet each other, and they're able to, like, you have clients who lose 10 kilos, 12 kilos, 15 kilos, and they say how much it's influenced their life. They go to Christmases, they come back in January and realize all these people commented on how, great I look, and that changes how they perceive themselves, and then they go out and get a new career because they feel better about their own self-confidence. They feel more alive. Like, you hang on to those moments a lot more than you hang on to the moments of it's you versus you back up against the wall. Is it really worth it?
So why do you do what you do now?
I think there's a selfish reason, and there's obviously then a macro external reason. Selfishly, it's because I feel so wired to do so, and I know that it is something I feel adequate in doing, in terms of coaching, in terms of identifying people's limitations from like when you're in a session itself, you hear the same things over and over, right? And when you hear the same things over and over, not just from a profession standpoint, right? Like, you sit down all day, all right, you've got hip mobility issues, you've got lower back issues, you've got core weaknesses, that sort of thing. But from a actual, because what we do is one-to-one, the deeper relationships you're able to generate, you're able to actually, like, you see a person more than they probably see their parents, right? And so being able to have that opportunity of influence, to be able to speak into someone else's life on such a regular basis and be able to see the fruit of that, because they come back the following week and they say, I did this, I did that, I did that. That's the selfish reason why I like it. The macro reason is more so the mission of IPC, which is to influence 100,000 lives over the next 5 years through physical and psychological transformation. So that's the main kind of macro vision that we always look for the most.
I feel like that mission hasn't changed since our last podcast. I don't know if we talked about it, but at least what the language you were saying back then was very similar. Is that something that you feel like how has that affected the way that you've chosen to build the team and the way that you've chosen to build the business? The fact that you've got that mission.
Well, you got to build it. You got to build it right from a standpoint of, are we going to go more for width, or are we going to go more for depth? Okay, so what I mean by that is, I could make the goal something along the lines of, we want to inspire and change 1 million lives every single day, right? That's going to have a very different way of building. You're going to have to go a platform of, mass amounts of marketing and franchising and licensing and whatnot. What we're trying to do is in a lot more, I wouldn't say small scale, because 100,000 people is a lot of people, right? But from the scale that we're trying to achieve, we have to hire the right people for that, right? We have to be able to train our coaches specifically well to be able to have the retention we have, and to be able to have the results and the influence that we have on these people too. And so you have a deeper connection to the team, because that team is then able to help bring that mission to fruition a lot easier. Then I guess, someone who's trying to mass market or franchise or something along those lines.
Yeah. And would you say that the mission of IPC is an extension of your own personal?
Absolutely. I think every founder's mission is usually an extension of their own personal, own personal wants and needs. For people who go into the education side of things, it's trying to create reliable education for things that they didn't have before. It is an extension, but I'm thinking back, and it was a mission back in 2018, when we first began. So we're still on that relentless pursuit for that. And everything that we try to create is with that vision in particular in mind.
How did you come up with that mission?
I think from a math standpoint, I thought it made sense. If we influence, let's say people have, I did the math not long ago. If we're able to influence 1,000 people, and then over the course of a lifetime, they know 100 people deeply over the course of a lifetime, that's 100,000 people.
Right.
That's the simplest way you could put it. So,
right.
Yeah.
So really it's directly with 1,000. and by extension, 100,000.
Yeah.
And you've kind of inspired everyone around the team to buy into that.
The team's on board, and the team, like any team member, they're going to have their own ambitions. However, to be able to be an employee of IPC, they have to have bought into their mission and know it off by heart. I think that's very key as well.
That's awesome. How do you feel teenage Blake would look at you now? Do you think he'd be proud of you?
I think in the sense of not caring or not having the weight of other people's opinions on his shoulders, I think in that aspect he would be proud. I think all of us have levels of achievement that we think we should have accomplished by now that we never do. But you realize it's in the pursuit of that. That's what's most important, right? So if teenage Blake was like, all right, by this age, you would have this car or this amount of cash in the bank or this many properties or buildings or something like that. From that aspect, he'd be like, oh, you suck. But from an aspect of the maturity level, I think he would be proud, yeah. Because then you realize none of that actually really matters. Because it's like they're all destinational things, right? But once again, it comes back down to the trust fund babies. They don't have to become anything to get that stuff.
Yeah.
It's and then obviously when you and I die, we don't take any of that stuff. But all in the between, it's all about the character development. That is the only thing that I hang around some really, really successful clients. I'm talking very, very successful, multi seven figures, and you get to the point of you don't really care about that stuff. That fades away when you get to know them. It really does, because it's a good thing to say at a party or a school reunion. But if you're just going to be that guy that, yeah, you've done some things and you've got some nice watches and cars, but no one likes to hang out with you, that's a pretty lonely world to be in.
So what about that character development do you think matters? Is it that fact that you said you want to be someone people want to hang around, or is there more to it?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that people want to see the most is that you've been through the trenches. I really do think that. Because you and I can listen to a lot of inspirational people and can be driving to work, listen to a podcast, and you just subconsciously are saying, yeah, easy for you to say. Easy for you to say. That was handed to you and whatnot. And then you hear the backstory and you realize, actually, I've never been through that. Like, I've never slept on the floor of a gym, or I've never slept in my car by choice or by no choice, if that makes sense. And this is where these people come from, and they pull themselves out of that. And then you think, okay, that's a pretty admirable how they've gotten from A to B.
Do you feel like you've got some of that backstory?
I do. There have been many times where, just probably before I met Zara, around 2016, 17, I should say, that was some very tough times against, you move out with someone and then you've got to move back home, and then you've got to re-find yourself again, and then you've got to start at a different gym. And I've been through things that, yeah, I think we've all been through things that we're not proud of. But probably the biggest one is, when mum and dad got a divorce, I stayed with mum, and in that time, it's very hard to, you've got a dad on one side, you've got a mum on the other side. And I think the hardest thing was not even fighting for attention or anything like that. It's another one of those things where you think, all right, are the people that I look to most for not for significance, I wouldn't say that. I would say for admiration would probably be one. I think we spoke about on the last podcast in terms of trying to chase people's acceptance and trying to chase their approval of you. And I think definitely my parents' eyes, that was one thing that I was trying to chase for a lot. And I think a lot of men struggle with that too. Whether it be they're closer to their mom, or they're distant with their mom, or they're closer with their dad, or distant with their dad. I think their parents are one thing that they're always striving for approval for, and it's very hard for them to actually come to a place where they find that approval.
That's a common theme for a lot of us in some way. Like, obviously I don't have the same story as you when it comes to that, but I know that myself and many people I know have battled with expectations of parents at some stage.
Yeah.
Or whatever it is.
The thing about the parents I always come back to is the fact that where did their parents come from? Their parents came from Great Depressions and wars, and the things that they were told weren't, they worked for their parents and maybe worked for maybe 2 or 3/4 of our parents' life, and then they came into this digital generation where it started to change, and now we're a part of that, right?
Yeah.
So, they've had to adapt just as much as we've had to adapt. And I just always hold the belief that I think everyone too should as well, they've done the best they can with what they've had. And whether or not you really think that that's true, I think it's the best framework to really look at your parents as, because you never, you didn't experience what they experienced at 18. You weren't even alive. You weren't even a dot, but they go through significant trauma, big T, little t, whatever it might be, that then they may not have the awareness that they're passing that back down to you, right? And so I think this generation now has to come to the point of when is the buck going to stop with us? Like, we can complain all we want about what our parents should and shouldn't have done, but when are we going to start and say, no, this is the time where now more than ever, kids have to be nourished and protected and loved and brought up with right values, despite what we grew up with.
How do you think that's going to affect maybe when you're parenting at some stage?
Yeah, I think the best thing my parents did for me was not give me anything. And I mean that in a sense of, like, they knew that there were many times that I was struggling, and there were times where they did give me something which I didn't even expect of. Like, for example, they helped buy my first car. We went 50-50 on that, right? But there were times where, that was done based upon what they had done previously with my own sister, right? So if I was to look at what I would do for my kids moving forward, it'd be very similar in terms of knowing that when your back's up against the wall, this is the time where the character development is given most. And if I had to bail out for every time that something went sideways, I just don't think that I would have the runs on the board that I do now. And I think personally, that's how I would raise. Well, then you get this question: what difference would you raise a son versus a daughter, right? Because what I'm talking about now is a very masculine approach in terms of figuring it out on yourself. I'm there for your support, but not for your own means, that type of thing, right? I'm not a piggy bank. I'm here for your emotional support. You can do it. So yeah, I think that goes both ways. But I don't know how I would. With the daughter, it'd be a lot more of a safety and security approach. Like, I think I can only somehow understand this you and I can only somehow understand this from, if we have sisters, or if anyone has a sister, right? Like, or if you have a wife who's a daughter, obviously, right? So when your wife comes, or your future wife, your fiance comes down the aisle and their dad gives them to you, right? That is significant in such as the way that the dad treated the daughter, the husband should treat the daughter at the same time in a perfect world. And so if we think of it from the way that we treat our wives now, which is to love and to care and to provide and to be a space for emotional support, that would be the way that I treat the daughter.
That's very insightful. I feel like we should have another podcast about this when we do have kids. And we'll revisit it.
Rock and just there, and yeah.
But no, I like what you said there. I'm actually wanting to draw back to something you've said a few times so far, which is you've said the phrase "back up against a wall." Do you feel like that's a place that people kind of need to find themselves in at some point?
I think everyone does, but to what extent is the biggest factor. Like I said, there's people you and I can listen to in influential spheres that thankfully we never had to go through those moments as well. You know, the one story I think about a lot of is Sylvester Stallone. He couldn't get a movie role to save his life. He had to sell scripts and no one would want to buy them. And he actually had to sell his dog for food, which would, if I had to do that, that would absolutely break my heart. But as soon as he got Rocky, you know, after years of not being successful, not a couple of days or weeks, months, it's years of not being successful, he finally had a breakthrough. And, you know, thankfully, I've never had to experience anything like that. But look at how successful he is, you know. So everyone has to go through it. I really do. The more that you are bubble wrapped as a child and going into your teen years, and the more that you get bailouts and whatnot, I feel like that does mess you around psychologically. But at the same time, though, we're all faced with similar crossroads. But what outlet are you going to take, right? There are some kids, there are some teenagers or young adults who get their heart broken and they either go and do cocaine or they go to the gym, right? So the back up against the wall, the horrible thing, big T, little t, that happens to you is going to happen to everyone at some extent. How you use that as fuel is really the biggest, like what outlet you use that fuel for is the biggest thing to think about.
Love that. I feel like that's the story of many, many people and who have at least been trying to do something with their lives.
But then that then becomes another hurdle, right? And then they have to then think about like how long do they want to be in that, you know, no shame if anyone goes down that path, but eventually you realize, this is probably not the way that I was designed to act and be in this certain way with these certain substances or vices. So what should I actually do? Right. So a lot of people go through that, and then some of them don't find that out until they're in their mid 40s, late 50s, and then become extremely well known and successful. You know, there's a guy I listen to called Peter Attia. He's one of the most well-spoken. He's a coach. He's a doctor, but he was literally on the cusp of bankruptcy, and no one liked him in his family and everything, like at the age of 45.
Yeah, right.
45. And it's only at 55 that he's turned everything around. Right. So the hardest thing for, I guess, this particular generation, and probably the best thing for this particular generation, is the fact that we can see a zero to hero story happen in real time. Right? Because you can watch someone's social media and see how they've gone, okay, well, this guy didn't used to shave, or he smelt and he's just partying all the time, to holy dooly, he's now going to these conferences, or he's now liaising with these successful people. Like, and you could scroll, you can literally see the evidence of, it was around this time that person made that change, or they made that shift in their life. You know? That's good.
I feel like, that's really valuable, and I feel like we've all kind of had that moment. Well, as in at least I can speak for me and you. We all in the room.
Yeah.
And Matt. But no, that's excellent. And so, I guess coming into the upside of everything at the moment, you're obviously doing quite a lot with your life today, and obviously a significant amount of that is within IPC. So what would you say even today now, what are the things that you find yourself in your own flow zone? Like what are the things that you find yourself doing that time could really just fly because you're doing what you really love doing at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. Like everyone asks, I think when you're first starting out in any business, you're the main guy, you're the main bodybuilder, you're the main guy on the tools, right? And in my industry, people tend to want to try to escape that as quickly as possible once they become successful in that kind of realm, if that makes sense. So they will want to, once they get really full and really busy, then they're like, all right, well, how can I put people online, or how then can I buy a gym, or how then can I do this and that? What I've really found to be really rewarding, even though I've got, a semi-large team and other coaches, is still being able to choose who I work with, and people who have trained with me for 7-8 years, still being able to see them of the morning. And it would be from 6 a.m. till 8:30, and it feels like 5 minutes. So still being that technician, even though it's a lot smaller percentage nowadays, I still find that flow, and it keeps me engaged with, or forces me to stay up to date with obviously how to help people, and not just see a client as a client, but to see them as a proper, deep human understanding connection of this person has a problem. How can I help them? How can I help them in every other area of their life as well, in even a very small 1% way? So that's where I see most flow.
Amazing.
Yeah.
It's very interesting because a lot of, I guess, people, when they say you want to scale a business, you want to try and remove yourself at some point from being the technician, but you still find that joy yourself. How are you balancing scaling and growing a business with still maintaining that touch point of being still a technician in some way?
You need to start, depending upon what stage of business that you're at, but I've kind of nailed it down to 3 separate sections in a company. You've got acquisition, you've got delivery, and you've got operations. Where I sort of sit is more around the operation side of things. So making sure that from a acquisition delivery standpoint, all of that is optimized for the best possible outcome for everyone, both the client and the coaches at the same time. So I would spend really 80% of my time there. And then roughly 20% of my time is would still be on the floor. Now I could definitely do, I cap myself at the amount of people I'm able to take on, and each year that kind of gets a little bit less and less. But I know for a fact of how important it is to keep staying in touch with, the client, with trying to make people a raving fan as much as possible. And the only way you can do that is to actually be involved and on the floor and ensuring that their needs are being met.
Great. What do you think the biggest lesson is that you've learnt in all this time since you started IPC?
The lower your expectations, the happier you'll be.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Okay. The lower your expectations, the happier you'll be.
Yeah. I think if you have expectations on how other people ought to act, you're going to be disappointed. If you have expectations on how quickly your business should scale, I think you're going to be disappointed. If you have expectations on how your staff should be, you're going to be disappointed. I think there are expectations that need to be upheld, but to what extent that they are broken, I don't think you should put your hope in that. And that is really something that the more that I've leant back on that and understood from a very macro point of view, like people are not wired to serve my every need in the way that I need it to be served. Like the whole world does not revolve around what my perfect ideal situation would be, then yeah, I think that has solved a lot of problems too.
Awesome. Doesn't it revolve around us? Just joking.
But no, like there are always going to be times and where you just question humanity. Like you just think, did someone really do that? Did that person really take for example, $80,000 of worth of billables away from you in a heartbeat? Or did that person really leave a bad review or say this about you behind your back? And you think, well, the lower your expectations, the happier you'll be, right? Like it was, should I expect them to do that? No, but I shouldn't expect them not to do that, because the only thing I can control is how much I'm able to give to that individual from an aspect of care and like within that delivery phase, how can I make this the best experience possible for them?
Awesome. What about the best piece of advice you feel someone else has given you that you've implemented?
I'd say from one perspective, how you do one thing is how you do everything. And I think that's where our slogan is strength, fitness, and excellence. And I think that's where the excellence component comes from. Excellence is a big key to how you should approach most things in your life. And when I say most things, I mean all things, right? Like, if I go from work and I had a subpar day where I just half-assed everything, and then I try and jump on a basketball court and play my heart out, it's not going to work, because I've got to change my mindset to think, oh yeah, well, that thing wasn't really important, but this is really important. But if everything is approached with the same mentality of excellence, then you never have to worry about if you're on or not, because the results just take care of themselves after that. And a more, I guess, stoic kind of way to think of things is that, all of us in 100 years will not really matter to this earth. I can't think of anyone from the year 1910 that really changed my life, right? Now, maybe in this day and age of everything being stored digitally is going to be different, but if we're going to let someone hold us back based upon their perceived opinion of us, and they're probably not even thinking of us anyway, probably couldn't give it a hoot. I can't swear on this podcast, but they probably couldn't care less about what we're doing, and yet we think they're the ones holding us back from actually taking the action that we know we need to take. So we're going to die anyway, and their opinion's going to be irrelevant, so we might as well do it. Their opinion is irrelevant, but when you have the death in there, it's kind of like, well, it's going to be irrelevant regardless.
So how do you want to be remembered?
Obituary is a really interesting thing. And I remember when I was actually quite young, like around 15, I had someone told me to write out my obituary, which is like, as a 15-year-old, where everyone else is partying and
exactly
hooking up. I kind of miss that. So I think the way I want to be remembered is someone who's left it all out on the field. That's probably the first kind of macro perspective. Like, all right, that guy, he did everything he could with what he had and what he's been given. But from another perspective, as someone who's been entrusted with other people's livelihoods, other people's health, their own bodies, as a husband, it's the fact that every fiber of my being has had an element of care, and, as I said before, an excellence involved in that. And so that's kind of the two ways I kind of think about it. If I die in a car crash leaving here, I hope that that's what people would say at my funeral.
Let's hope that doesn't happen.
Well, let's hope that, yeah.
But I'm glad to hear that that's exactly how it ties back into everything you do. I think I've been observing that from up close and at a distance. And I feel like hopefully that's what people get when they meet you and see what you're all about.
Yeah, I think when people meet me, they probably think I'm either too laid back or too intense. I probably don't have too much of a middle ground. Yeah.
That's an interesting one.
Because
on or off switch.
Yeah, on or off switch. I think I try. I'm more of a definitely speak when spoken to type guy. Because once again, like, there are so many things that shape us in our childhood, right? Where if we say the wrong thing at one time, then, or the perceived wrong thing at one time, then that just stays with us for a long period. But when I know I'm confident in a particular subject, that's when I'm going to speak my mind, speak my opinion.
Well, I've definitely enjoyed hearing your opinion and what you've got on your mind today. Before we wrap up, we have no idea who's going to be on the podcast next. But if you were to ask this person something, what do you want to know?
Who do you need to forgive in order to move forward in your life right now?
Insert melt emoji. That's a good one.
Yeah. And I do hope someone thinks about that and lets go of that. You know, what's really holding them back is usually something that person didn't even know that they did wrong. But, you know, it's like going down a steep hill with no brakes, and instead of a seatbelt, you're wearing glass. And, you know, that's what unforgiveness does. And I think that holds a lot of people back as well.
Well, I can't wait to hear the answer to that. And I really appreciate you taking your time out this afternoon to come and have a chat.
Absolute pleasure. That was a lot of fun.
We'll do it again soon.
Yep.
Awesome.
Thanks, Faye.